copy of it. All right, I'd like to call the planning board meeting of August 8th, 2024 to order. Persons who wish to do so are invited to attend in person or view the meeting at the link that's on the website or join by phone. Instructions, please note that the in-person meeting will not be suspended or terminated if technology problems interrupt the remote connection. We'll call the meeting to order. We'll start by introducing planning board members and staff. To my immediate right, Jane Ramson. All the way out down the end is my friend Hank McCarl, Doug Cook. I'm Rick Noonan. We have we have Beverly Bookin in remote setting. Staff-wise, we have Alex Kopelman, our community development director, Greg Cadamatore, our planning director, and our senior planner, Eric. Yeah. I was trying to give him a little bump. We have a single agenda item this evening. It's the review of Mass General Law 40A 3A, immediate communities zoning district scenarios. The planning board will review and discuss draft districts in draft zoning amendment language to comply with the 40A 3A MBTA communities requirements. So we do have, well, go ahead.
Sure. So I'll share my screen for the presentation that Emily and I will provide. At least I have a mouse tonight. That was nice. Oops, that's not what I wanted to do. Everybody can see that okay? So just kind of an overview of the agenda for this evening, do a little recap on where we landed last week with the agreed upon sub-districts, which at this point have been translated into a zoning map, which really provide the basis for Emily Innes, who's here this evening, to kind of take off from that as we've discussed the where and the what type of multifamily housing may be permitted in these districts, to translate that into a zoning amendment in the form of an overlay district. And then she has also done the job of looking through the ordinance to make sure that there aren't any other places that potentially can create a conflict to not actually enable as of right multifamily zoning. So she'll walk through the multifamily overlay district, which is the meat of the amendments, with some specific focus on the dimensional standards and the inclusionary provisions. And then there are a new host of site plan review requirements for multifamily projects in these particular districts. And then again, kind of a little bit of some of the cross-referencing that needs to occur in other sections of the ordinance to make sure that there are no conflicts for pursuing as of right multifamily. And then from that point, we can, again, I think, focus in on some specific areas that we certainly want to get some clarity from the board on its recommendation, particularly with the dimensional standards and parking requirements, and then also entertain any other questions that you might have. And then if we get to a positive point, then we'll also talk about some of the timeline and next steps, depending on the board's action this evening. So the final scenario that was presented by RKG last week, you'll recall these two maps. One on the left of the screen indicates the West Gloucester district in orange, and also highlighted the areas that, there's a lot of restricted area. So that was really, kind of the best option for creating a district in the West Gloucester Station area. And then on the right, the familiar areas in the R5 and also the two higher density districts around Maplewood Ave, pink, and up here, Gloucester Crossing. Welcome, David Rosen, in purple. And so that has now been translated into a zoning map that can be adopted as part of the multifamily overlay district ordinance and reference. So this is a draft of the zoning map, again, with two station areas and the districts that have been identified in the legend. It goes through the naming of those districts by color. We've kind of made sure that we really reference these districts related to streets or areas of the community. We formerly called, for instance, the purple area, the Halyard area. That's a particular development that could change over time. So that's now been called Schoolhouse area. And then again, the downtown station area, West Gloucester and Maplewood Ave for the area that we have been calling either the Gloucester Mill or the Housing Authority area. So that's the map that will be going along with it. And again, Emily has kind of taken off and now defined what it means for everything that we've discussed so far for the allowance in these different areas and put it into an ordinance. So
Just to interrupt though, for the public, could we recap a little bit how we got to these 4 areas? You want me to do it?
no, I'm happy to. You know,
One paragraph.
Okay, I'll try to do it. I'll try to do it in 3 minutes. Somebody start the timer. So again, this has been a long discussion, starting way back in with the first public forum, with the community identifying areas that they thought may be more appropriate for multifamily housing. Taking into consideration, there is a lot of flexibility in the law and the guidelines. But there are some also absolutes that, you know, half of the capacity that's required for Gloucester has to be within one or both of these half-mile radii around the station areas. And so we knew we would be arriving at a substantial amount of rezoning or overlay zoning in these areas because of that requirement. Other areas were looked at, and one of the things that's really important to remember is that, for better or for worse, the state's guidelines really require gross density, which is something that's a little bit unfamiliar for the way that we typically do things. We typically zone land and lots. Their approach also includes right-of-ways. So there's a real kind of push and pull in terms of a minimum density requirement of 15 units per acre and a capacity of 2,270 units. So we kind of refocused through subcommittee work over the course of the last month and have arrived at portions of the downtown area in the R5 district that will allow 3-family, a smaller area in West Gloucester that also would provide for 3-family on certain size lots in the orange district on the right. And then a couple of opportunities to really promote housing, and particularly housing that would trigger our inclusionary requirements and provide some affordable housing in the Pink area, in the Maplewood area, and also up near Halyard on a 2-acre site adjacent to the Halyard project that folks might be familiar with. That one in particular, we needed to get HLC's approval to expand into a portion of a property, which we have received. So at this point, these are the 4 sub-districts that Emily has provided zoning language for. Is that 3 minutes?
3 minutes on the button.
I don't feel like that sounded really simple for somebody to bring them up to speed, but that's where we are.
Can I just ask a question?
Yeah.
Why do we need to ask HCD's permission to add in schoolhouse? Did I read that correctly? Did I
Yes.
hear that correctly? Why?
Yeah,
Why?
Sure, that was one. So the way the guidelines are set up, you can zone an area and you then start to look at the number of lots in that area that comply, that can actually produce as of right housing based on the parameters that you've set up in your zoning. In that particular case, we were not putting an overlay over the entire 33 acres that is the Gloucester Crossing site. We were focused on a portion of it. It doesn't follow property boundaries. So it's kind of what's been drawn is really kind of paper space in terms of a portion of that property. And when you do that, you need their permission to basically almost kind of subdivide a lot with overlay.
Gotcha. Okay, makes sense. Thank you.
Yep.
Where's yours?
Emily,
Thank you very
introduce yourself.
much. So for the record, my name is Emily Ennis. I'm president of Ennis Associates. We're a 7-person urban planning and design firm out of Newburyport, so shared coastal community. While you have been working with my colleagues at RKG on the geography and on the map, now we're moving towards the text. So one is to demonstrate compliance, that you've met the unit capacity, that you've defined the right areas. Now we're taking that and turning it into a zoning that you all will be able to use going forward. So I'm going to walk you through, Greg, if you don't mind moving to the next slide. I'm going to walk you through the different components of the zoning, just so we can kind of chunk the conversation into those pieces. I'm going to take you all the way through and then we'll come back and we can discuss individual pieces. The genesis of this text is the sample zoning put out by HLC at the beginning as a guide for communities. I actually don't write that zoning, so I'm familiar with it. The key, however, for you all is to translate it into zoning that works for Gloucester, that captures the discussions that you had in the geography and the dimensions that we're using with the compliance model. And then also to look at your current zoning and make sure that the format is right, that we haven't found anything else in the zoning that might be a barrier. So we start off with the purpose, and this again, there's many ways you can discuss the purpose. So, if you see something that you want to change, feel free, but in general, with most of the communities, it's obviously a variety of housing sizes and types, where the housing is located, and the idea that it is linked to walkability for a number of public purposes. Preserving open space in a community by locating new development where there's infrastructure, existing infrastructure, and that idea of that infrastructure also being pedestrian and bike friendly infrastructure, and the housing support that. Next slide, please, Greg. So the next pieces are, now we've got to link the zoning to the map. Greg just showed you the map. So this is just the section of the zoning that says, here's where it applies and how you can find out where it applies. This also allows us to define the 4 sub-districts, which means that later on in the zoning, we can change some of the requirements based on the sub-district. That's why we have them. So you'll see that coming in. And then we also establish this as an overlay district. We talk about how it relates to the underlying zoning and the rest of the zoning. So that's this section. Next slide, please, Greg. And then this is, as Greg mentioned earlier, the actual zoning map that the text will refer to. Next slide. So now we start to talk about the uses and how they are allowed within this overlay district. And it's important to understand that the overlay district, once somebody chooses to use that overlay district, that's what they're using. So they can't say, oh, I like the uses in the overlay, but I prefer the dimensional standards in the base. They can't mix and match. Once they're using the overlay, this is what they're using. So in the downtown station area and the West Gloucester station area, the discussions have been about a lower level of housing density in those areas. So keeping the ability to do single family, having 2-family housing, and then allowing the multifamily dwellings as of right, but for 3 dwelling units. Maplewood Avenue and Schoolhouse Road area, the idea is that the multifamily dwellings would start at 4 units, and then or 4 units in a single building, or 2 or more buildings on the same lot with more than 1 residential dwelling unit, which is HLC's way, and now the state's definition of this is how you do 2 duplexes or larger buildings with more units, but the minimum would be 2 duplexes.
Can you go back to that point that you just made about not being able to use
Pick and choose?
pick and choose?
Yeah,
Just to
absolutely.
clarify that for who else might be on the call.
Yeah, happy to. So actually, Greg, if you go back to the establishment. 2 slides, there you go. So this establishment basically says, okay, we've got an overlay district here. It is superimposed on the underlying zoning district. So if you have a property in that zoning district, you have a base district always. Property is always zoned for some, almost always zoned for something. You retain your rights under that base district to do what you want to do. Now we're adding an overlay on top of it, and you have additional rights as a property owner. You can choose to use the base district. You can choose to use the overlay district. You can also choose to do nothing, but if you want to redevelop, it's going to be the base for the overlay. Once you've made that decision,
you have to stick with, if you've chosen base overlay, you have to stick with the uses, dimensional standards, other controls of base overlay. If you choose to use, the base district, if you choose to use an overlay district, then you have to stick with the uses, dimensional controls, and other standards of the overlay district. So, and thank you for asking that, because that's an important question. So going back to the uses. So first decision, if you're going to use this overlay, you're in the downtown station area in West Gloucester, you're limited to single, two, or multifamily dwelling, but multifamily dwelling of only 3 units. If you are in Maplewood Avenue or Schoolhouse Road, 4 units or more, and the ability to have multiple buildings on a lot, and we'll see that
I
later.
think it's just worth to summarize that in the larger areas where the zoning applies, near the downtown station and the West Station area, that's where you're seeing the ability to do a 3-family, which isn't a substantial difference than what's allowed now, it's allowed through special permit. The areas where you can do larger, more developments consisting of more units are targeted to, specific sites of opportunity. So I just want to, clarify that.
That's a great point. And actually, Greg, if you don't mind jumping back to the map before this, that allows us to see the yellow there on the left-hand side, and yellow to my eyes, and the orange on the right-hand side. Those are your the 3-family districts, and then the pink and the blue are your larger density districts. They're much, to your point, Alex, much smaller size or district size there. So it's a great point. All right, if you don't mind jumping ahead to, so now we're talking about the dimensional standards, and you can see again, we have dimensional standards by the sub-districts. So having the sub-districts allows us to tailor the uses, the dimensional standards, and some of the other standards so that we can respond to existing conditions in the area and the community desires for the area. So the downtown station and the West Gloucester station, you can see that the lot area, minimum width, et cetera, those are all representative of the smaller parcel sizes that you already have in those areas. Maplewood Ave, Schoolhouse Road, to your point earlier, you've got smaller districts, but there are also larger lot sizes within those districts. And that combination of geography and dimensional standards is what creates what you can do on that site. Key thing here is you see not only was the use limited to 3-family for the downtown station, West Gloucester station areas, you can also see we have a maximum dwelling units per lot in here of 3 for each. And on Maplewood Ave and Schoolhouse Road, a density calculation, which is the dwelling units per acre as opposed to per lot. So that again is consistent with the type of dimensional standards you have. And there's also dimensional standards for accessory uses, which is consistent with other parts of your zoning. Next slide, please.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Yeah, should we, just a procedural question, should we ask our questions as we go, or should we save them to the end?
If it's easier for you to
So
do them as
walk
you
through the whole
go.
thing
yeah.
and then come back.
Okay.
I do
Yeah.
think this is kind of the area where most of the input
Yeah.
needs to be, so.
I'm happy with however you want to do it, so I'll leave it to Jared.
Oh, it's not me, but
If you want, yeah, go ahead, David.
So it says in the middle of the chart, building height.
Yep.
35 feet.
Yes.
And then at the very bottom line, it says maximum building height 12 feet.
That's the accessory uses.
Yeah, you have, if you
There
follow.
should be a
the-
black line,
Yeah.
sorry, or like a,
Yeah, I think maybe if we use the same kind of coloring that's on the header column
Mhm.
and put a
For the
bar
accessory
across for
unit.
accessory use, you'll see that there's a break in the table.
Yeah.
And those dimensional standards are for accessory use.
Okay.
yeah,
Yep.
that's right.
Yeah, it's a great move for me just.
I had a comment then also on this, which is that, I had been a proponent of the first sentence, which just says the requirements of section 3.1.5, 3.1.6, 3.1.2 are not applicable. 3.1.6 refers to height, and there's A and B in 3.1.6 about height. And the first one says, if it's under 35 or, right, if it's over 35 feet, it goes to city council, and if it's under 35 feet, it does not.
Mhm.
So I don't know if we
Yeah, I
still,
think that's-
if we just mean 3.1.6A, or if we mean, because we still want over 35 feet to go to city council, or no?
Yes, yeah, so I mean, that's one of the
Got
that was one point, and I think that was also raised, Sean had sent in some comments, because he couldn't be here this evening. So I think that's something that we should talk about in terms of trying to make sure that we certainly don't want to create a conflict with a situation where we're saying in a table, you have an as of right 35, but then somewhere else in the ordinance, it says above 30 to 35, you need to go to the zoning board. So that's what's trying to be addressed in that first comment. But then the question is, can somebody pursue? They're really not pursuing as of right if they also need a height exception.
True.
So
Or a height exception.
So
by
they're
beyond
not taking,
35 feet,
they're not taking advantage of MFOD. So
Right,
they're going back
right,
to.
so if they
existing
wanna go
zoning.
over 35 feet, then they would
They're
have to
doing it.
follow the underlying district.
Got it.
Likewise, the only thing that I think we might have to think about is making sure that we don't create a conflict for the 55-foot.
Yes.
Because that's a situation where, again, we don't want it to say over 35, you have to go to city council when we're saying 55 here.
And I think you sent me some language just as
Yeah.
I was getting ready to come here,
Yes.
so we can
can
work on
revisit
that,
that.
yeah,
I
absolutely.
have a question. Existing housing with triple deckers, what's the normal height of them?
It's very variable. When we did this 2 years ago,
Yeah.
and provided a lot of examples, they range from 32 to 37. You know, some of the Victorians on Washington Street or, you know, other areas in the community are much higher.
Yeah.
In that 35 to 37-foot range. So I think that's something we can also talk about when we talk about design standard. We haven't really talked about roof line at all. The model that RKG ran really thinks about things in terms of stories, and then we, you know, the board and the city council can define what that means. If you say, you know, the existing 30 feet, then you're probably likely to get a flat roof building. If somebody's trying to put in, you know, 8 to 10-foot ceilings, and you need that, you know, those floor spaces that take up a foot, so, you know, it starts to really make
Yeah.
it probably end up being a flat roof, so that's something we can also talk about. But it's your recommendation. Other than height, the downtown station dimensions are mirroring R5.
Mhm.
With the exception with some language around front yard setback, which Emily will talk about. In West Gloucester, I think we talked about at the last meeting, other than the reduction in lot size, it follows the R10. The area is zoned R20, but there's a little bit of a forgiveness there. Because those R20 standards are very aggressive for a 6,000 square foot lot. And again, that threshold was picked because it's about where most of those lots are. They're between 6,000 and 8,000 square feet. The Maplewood Ave area is a little bit specialized. It's a bigger site, has that acre minimum. The height, you know, again, is that 35 feet. I think that's in line with at least what's there now. It's actually it's higher than most of the buildings that are on that site. But certainly provides, you know, with both density and that height for that district. And then the schoolhouse, again, it is a little bit of a hybrid between what was already drafted and approved in the past for the overlay district. And that's where that 55-foot height comes from as well.
Beverly?
One thing about the height, we ran with this 2 years ago and it didn't fly. But I do want to remind everybody that in probably about 90% of single family zones throughout the country, 35 feet is the maximum. Typically 30 is unusually low. So I see our going with it fine. My question here is, if I'm not mistaken, can you do an accessory dwelling unit in a duplex or only in a single family house?
They're only for single family homes,
Okay.
as it's drafted in our ordinance right now.
Right, which is to say that if you do a triplex, you can also add an ADU, correct?
Correct.
Right, so it may be worth a footnote that indicates that, but I don't know. I'm just saying, I don't want people to assume that an ADU is an add-on in addition to the additional density, because that would cause some people to be concerned.
Well,
That's a concern.
I mean, I think that our ADU ordinance says it's only accessory to a single family.
Okay, that's fine. I'm just raising it.
Yeah, and we also say these are the uses that you could do in the overlay, and you can't mix and match. So I think that one's kind of covered.
So what is the accessory then on this chart? What is the accessory referring to?
It's referring to garage,
Garage,
mostly
shed,
garage,
yeah.
sheds, parking, the other things that would be accessory to a three.
Oh, I misunderstood. I thought it was accessory use, ADU, not just accessory building. I apologize.
Okay.
Would be the accessory
uses.
dwelling use.
Yes.
Yes. Yes, we've defined it as, hang on, garage, parking, shed, and accessory signs.
And that heading of accessory uses other than signs is the same heading that is in the 1, 2, and 3 family in the dimensional requirements of section 3.
So should it say?
So we're using the
accessory?
same format of, you have your principal use requirements, and then you have your accessory use requirements.
Should it say accessory uses other than signs and accessory dwelling units? ADUs?
I don't think because we don't allow the use in the multifamily overlay district, I don't think we have to address it with a belt and suspenders of saying, really, we're saying not this use because we don't allow it in the district.
Any other questions before we need to move on?
So if you'll leave it there for a moment, you'll see there are 2 footnotes, one for Maplewood Ave and one for the downtown station. For Maplewood Avenue, we are specifically allowing multi-building lots only in Avenue. More than one principal building, but the other dimensional requirements have to be complied with. So you can't just cram them in, you have to follow these requirements. And then for the downtown station, Greg alluded to it earlier, we have that minimum front yard of 15, but because of the varying conditions of the buildings that are in this area already, we have the ability to relax it. So if you are building a new building in this area and you have a building on either side with different front setbacks, you can choose to match one or the other buildings on either side, or you can do the front yard setback, the average of those 2 setbacks. And the idea is to keep the front setback relatively consistent with what's going on. So
That relaxing is not a ZBA trip, that's a.
that's
planning
part
board.
of the whole site plan review. Yes, absolutely. The idea is that we're not having to have
Right.
an applicant come in and go in different directions. It's all within this.
I'd like to address the lot area minimum square foot also, because as we know, the minimum lot size for the downtown area is 5,000 square feet, and for West Gloucester, it is what?
20,000.
20,000 square feet. So the reason for anyone who's listening that this says 4,000 and 6,000 is to capture any lots that currently exist that are 4,000 square feet or more in the downtown area, and 6,000 feet or more in the West Gloucester area, because there are a lot of non-conforming lots. But it does not give anybody the right to create a new 4,000 square foot lot or a new 6,000 square foot lot in the West Gloucester station. Just so that's not misread or misunderstood.
Next slide, please, Greg. So the next component is the off-street parking and loading requirements, and you can see them up there. Again, they vary slightly by sub-district. This was the levels that were tested in the compliance model.
They're
yes.
actually, I just want to clarify
Oh.
that. So these mirror the existing requirements in the underlying districts. What was modeled was more conservative at 2. So that's something that we really, I think we kind of went around back and forth in some of the last discussions about whether or not that may be too much, or maybe there's a compromise at 1.5. But just to be clear, this is what would happen if there was the proposal for residential use in these districts, with the exception of the Schoolhouse Road area, because that's currently zoned extensive business. The overlay would allow for housing on that site, but it mirrors the standards that were applied to the Halyard project.
So there's
Well,
essentially
some-
no change to the parking.
If this were
Amount
adopted,
required.
it would be akin to what's required in the
Right.
underlying district,
Right.
yes.
I would like to point out that there's an A in front of residential that, since there's no B, there doesn't really need to be.
Yes. Microsoft Word and it's fun formatting. Thank you for the catch. So. There's a lot of, not very nice things said about Microsoft Word when dealing with this. It does allow the planning board to authorize tandem parking and to modify the design and layout standards of your existing section 4.1 through the site plan review process. So, you get an oddly shaped lot, you need a little bit of relief, you're authorized to do that. Section, the next section is just, let's see, signs and a couple of other things we wanted to focus.
Stay
Yeah,
on parking for a
yeah,
while.
of course, go ahead.
Is everyone okay with these parking requirements? Has there been no discussion about
And I
them?
want to ask the question is, this is the minimum parking requirements, right?
That's what
It's
some
not-
of you
yes, It's not a
require.
maximum,
Correct.
right?
Yeah.
So let's real life this for a second. You're gonna go and build a 3-family in the downtown station area, so you have 3 units, you're gonna have to do 3 off-street parking spaces. I think some things to consider is if you're on a 4,000 square foot lot, might not be space to create 3 parking spaces. There's also a cost associated with it, so they could maybe be lower, or maybe you could build in relief if in circumstances when there's not ability to build the spaces. So some different things to consider.
I think that the to David's point and to your point is that, you want to encourage density and you have 0 parking per unit, right? And so on-street parking only. But I don't know that that necessarily flies in the, in the path for this. And if we're the special permit granting authority under major project review or, site plan review, I should say, then we have that flexibility if there, a hardship does arise on a small lot and you can demonstrate that, then that's fine, right? I mean, it's.
So is that something that would be possible now? So if somebody came and said, I can't fit 3 spaces, they could get a special permit or something or would that be
Would that be a
ZBA?
waiver of
That
this?
That would be a variance.
So that would be
Oh,
for
a variance?
ZBA, and they could do that, they could apply for that.
Yep.
Okay,
Yeah, so that's the relief, yeah.
I don't know how you would do less than 1 space per dwelling unit, because then how do you decide who gets the space?
You gotta pay more.
Hmm.
Like the condos for parking spaces in Boston and they pay $1 million for the parking space.
So we say, 2 spaces per 3 family? You can't really do 1 in a house.
I think the thing is too, and we've tested a little bit, Eric and I, that the conversions that we've seen in the last 2 years in front of ZBA as of right, all needed variances for something else. Right, so it's not as though the parking is gonna trigger the only variance, you gotta go to ZBA. And if, God bless you, if that's the only thing you're gonna have to do, right, but I think you have to put something in writing that, seems to make sense, it's the underlying, law of the land today. And I don't know that we need to shine more light on it, and it's gonna be a case by case basis anyways, in my opinion.
Section 3 does not preclude the other portions of the zoning ordinance, right? That's part of it, is that
Right.
you're allowing the use under certain circumstances, but not everybody is necessarily going to be able to meet those circumstances. You have the waiver of the variance.
Go ahead, Beverly.
Yeah, the problem about parking is very difficult to parse. First of all, a certain percentage of people who live in our community don't have cars. Here in Portland, Maine, where I happen to be sitting right now, it's about 92% have cars and 8% don't. So if you have 100 units, you can make an argument for less than 1 per unit. You can make an argument for 90%, and you pretty well. But when you only have 3 units, it's either 2 or 3, it's not 2.5, right? Because so in this case, I think these are reasonable. Downtown, you're more likely to only have 1 car if you're close to transit, and at least that's what we'd like to encourage within the transit station. Further out, 1.5 reflects both bigger units and maybe not as much access to alternative modes. But these feel right to me for three unit buildings.
Thank you, Beverly.
I agree.
This is 1.5 for the West Gloucester Station area.
Yeah.
So what's the rationale?
Underlying district.
Do we think it makes sense though? I mean, is there a reason it should be different than the downtown station?
Well, it's bigger lots for the most part.
Bigger lots, but also maybe the square footage is bigger, and so the household may have 2 cars. But you can't have 4.5 spaces. You know, we're not talking, if we're only talking about 3 units is allowed by right, correct? So it might be 1.5 spaces per 2 units, and the 3rd unit is one way, because 4.5, you can't build a half of a parking space, and the rule would be to round up anyway. So I just don't know. But it's a tough one when you're only talking about 3 units.
I think we should stick with the underlying zoning. Does the underlying zoning say round up when you do it?
Can't
Right.
remember.
We probably have to be more specific here, because if we're saying this is what controls, we should probably have a note for that as well.
Yeah.
So either round up or round down, and the point is, I mean, you can't have half a space, so it is important to answer the question.
I'll look that up after this. Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Any other parking questions?
No.
Thank you, Alex, for that.
One more thing, the word residential, now that I'm thinking about it, A, parentheses, residential can all be struck, right? Because it's all residential in the NFOD.
Perfect. Next slide then. Okay. So the inclusionary or affordable housing is an interesting discussion that I think we should have. The way the language is structured now, or should be structured now, is that you have an existing section 5.11 for affordability. It does not meet the guidance, the compliance guidance, which from HLC, which is a 10% of units, 80% of AMI. So we've structured the language because we weren't quite sure when the EFA and the review would happen relative to this discussion. So the way the language stands now is you have an EFA that shows the higher level of affordability is achievable. Section 511 applies. If for some reason HLC does not feel that the EFA works or that the zoning works, you have an automatic step to what's in the compliance guidelines that's compliant. So you don't have to come back, in other
So
words.
EFA again, economic feasibility.
Economic feasibility analysis, yes, thank you. So, and that is done to show the level of affordability that is achievable within a specific community.
The state is okay with requiring 10% of units to be affordable at 80% AMI without an economic feasibility analysis. So you have that in there. But if our economic feasibility analysis proves the existing inclusionary zoning for Gloucester, which is 15% at 80, is feasible, then we can go that. So it's just a way to make sure that it's feasible.
And not an impediment.
Yeah.
And that you wouldn't have to come back, and redo something. It's just an automatic, okay, if this doesn't work, then this does.
So RKG is working on that for the 2 higher density districts, and if we have that answer, we may be able to just
Exactly.
strike that whole second paragraph if we're at that point in the public hearing process or before there's a decision made. But if not, then this is kind of that belt and suspenders.
And there were several communities, towns who were going to town meeting in the spring who are doing it this way. Obviously, it's a lot harder to bring things back to town meeting, so it's easier for them, but it's not a bad option for a city as well.
I'd say it's pretty likely that the existing inclusionary requirements are gonna be feasible. They're at 15 at 80.
It's good.
Any other questions on the affordability?
I mean, just to point out that this also says we round up. Ours, they would round down, but it is what it is, right?
Yes, so the round down, it partly depends on what your threshold is, but I had a couple of communities this spring where it was applying to 5 or more units. And so if you round off on 5 units, you're suddenly at 20%, not 10%. So again, you have an EFA that complies, you're going back to your existing
Yeah.
zoning, so, but that's why that's there. Next slide, please. So you do have site plan review standards that you can use in the site plan approval process. I've just listed the buckets here, so consistent with site plan review. You're allowed to look at circulation, access, parking, you're allowed to look at landscape, which can include the plantings, location, mechanicals and dumpsters, surface parking, how integrated garages fit. Because pretty much anything is probably going to be either infill development or rehabilitation of existing. I did add some guidance for infill development that discusses, okay, if you're putting a building into an existing context, you need to think about the massing and scale of proportion relative to the other buildings, how the entries works, materiality. I also put in some guidance for the relationship of multiple buildings on a lot, so that, you know, again, there has to be a consistency of the design around that. Happy to go into them in more detail if you like, but just wanted to have the buckets on the screen.
Maybe I missed this, but does it say someplace in here that the planning board has kind of jurisdictional authority over the site plan review? I know that I'm sure it does.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, we reference 5.8 and you are the
Yes.
site plan
Okay.
review.
All right.
So yes, your site plan, I have run across a few communities where their site plan review process would not work for section 3A. Your site plan review process pretty much does. So we're just referring to it and then saying, hey, there's these additional standards in here that we'd like the development to follow.
I guess the only thing I would highlight is these standards are applying to projects with 6 or more units. So for the
Yes.
3-family, you wouldn't be looking at all of these standards. You actually wouldn't be sending a 3-family to a site plan review.
Yes, we
As
talked
is
about,
present.
yeah,
Yep.
we talked about the appropriate threshold and felt that it was in our discussions that it was the 6 units or more rather than 3 units or more. So, but obviously happy to discuss that further. But that would reduce the number of projects that would come to those that would be the likely to have the most impact.
We have never had building design standards before, right? So
Right.
that would be new for us. I really like these. Also, do we need to say? No, there's no historic district in MFOD, right? Okay,
Yep.
right.
I think she was just agreeing that there's no.
This is probably nitpicky and wordsmithy, but under section C, additional requirements for multi-buildings on a lot. Item number 2, a paved pedestrian network shall connect parking to entities of all buildings and buildings to each other.
Entries.
I'm sorry. Paved, I mean, is it cobblestones, is it non-pervious, pervious?
We
No,
can.
This is one
yeah.
of David's
Mhm.
pervious topics, but
Nothing wrong with the pervious typing. We can talk about materiality. We can just note that there should be a connecting pedestrian
Okay,
network and
right.
not speak to
yeah, it's a
how,
material.
yeah. Mhm. So we could just take a pedestrian network, for example, and just leave it like that.
Any other questions under?
If not, we can go to my last slide and then we can always jump back again. So there were a couple of additional changes. One to add the MFOD, multi-family overlay district, to the list of districts. So that's the first one. And then to make site plan review applicable to this, we're adding it to 5.8.2. And then you actually have a section 5.30 already, which is permitting of certain pre-existing multifamily uses. This had a sunset, so that the zoning expired in 2020. And the idea was just to remove this, your sunsetted zoning, and put this in its place using the same number.
Wouldn't we need to define MFOD if we're putting those letters in 511 or else spell it out? Cause I think,
We could add the definition to that.
yeah, cause I
Yeah.
think,
That section in 511 you're speaking of,
yes,
so it's a listing of district by abbreviation,
yes.
Yeah,
so.
So, but you won't know what MFOD means, I'm trying to think.
Before.
Well, so it's a little bit circular because the MFOD is gonna tell you to go look at 511. And then 511 is gonna say this applies to these districts, which includes the MFOD.
I know, but. What are we, what section are we in? 3. No, we're in 5. So the dimensional regulations and use table appear in section 3.
You're just saying chronologically in the ordinance, you're gonna see MFOD and not
And
know
you-
what it is yet?
Yeah,
yeah.
Would you keep reading?
exactly.
You're saying that people aren't going to be curious and say, I can't go to sleep until I found out what MFOD is. Yes,
That's
I mean,
the
I was-
beauty of the online is they can type and search MFOD and it'll go right to the section.
Yes, I mean, to Greg's point, where I was following the existing formatting where they refer to, they're all referred to by their abbreviations, so.
But it's not
I
listed
don't-
in the section 2 use for dimensional regulations, section 3.
Yeah, that's actually a question we didn't discuss, was do you want, some of the communities I've worked with, the dimensional regulations stay within the zoning themselves. Some of it, we have it outside the article, and it points to, hey, this column is going to be added to your table of dimensional standards or table of uses. So I've kept it all within the article itself, because frankly, it's a lot easier to discuss that way, but that is an option.
So we have other overlay districts, how are they handled?
The mixed use overlay district is within the ordinance itself.
Yeah,
For the overlays are usually more specific and within a section, section 5.
Right.
And I think that table is really maxed. We have.
Yeah, no,
Well,
I
it's one of the
15
reasons I didn't
15 districts,
suggest
does
it
it throw
initially.
another column on that?
I don't, this
What
is,
about a footnote?
yeah, I don't wanna add it to the table.
No, I
It's
understand, yeah,
just-
I mean, we could, I mean, it would break the convention of that, but we could, after VB, say,
Mhm.
Because it's just, you're not
Mixed
listing the
use overlay
watershed
district.
protection overlay district or
Yeah.
anything else in the
Yeah.
in
we
section
could,
5.11.
write it out, I mean,
Yeah.
it would
Or
be-
just write it out, yeah.
Yeah, we could just write it out.
Yeah.
And then maybe parenthetically say MFOD.
That's what I would do, yeah,
Okay.
that way you
Okay.
get the name
Okay.
and the abbreviation.
So same with 5.8.2 projects in the MFOD and then. Right, okay, yeah.
I thought you were grabbing your purse. And that's my last comment.
Oh. No, I'm grabbing my cord. And thinking at the same time, it's really hard to multitask. So, yeah, do we need to go back to the parking issue, which we did not resolve, because if we're gonna recommend to move this along to the city council, we have to have it just right.
Well, we are at questions and discussions, so I'm gonna stop sharing. And move a couple of things up real quick.
Sure.
Yeah. Sorry, Dave.
The EPA will be having.
Also, this draft is dated 8/6.
And we will have a draft dated 8/8. We're done with all the revisions.
Okay. But how would we recommend to move along tonight unless do you want?
So everything that so far that has been discussed is in that draft. So, okay. Take your blue pen.
I did.
And make one
I'm
draft.
fixing it.
Okay, there
Okay.
you go. So it'll be the one that you're holding
Okay,
and you write on the top,
All right.
8/8.
all right,
Do you recommend to move it forward with the changes discussed?
as amended, I will. It's just that the motion that I
Yeah.
would make says the draft dated today, which would make sense.
Yeah.
You want one of those things, you're like, your copy.
Just right.
Jane?
Yeah, why don't
you pass
one of those
down? I've got this one.
Yeah, I'll take one too. Here.
I think I got two in there.
Is that
You
the
good?
business?
Yeah, I think.
Oh, there's two, okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So what more discussion do we want to have on parking? Things might be best.
So I don't know that we have any explicit language that talks about rounding.
We
I
don't,
think,
I just
I
looked it
think
up.
what has
Yeah.
occurred is if it has been a fraction of a space, half space, then it's been rounded up. I don't think it's ever been rounded down. So that would be 5 for,
Or it hasn't been rounded at all. What really happens when?
I think it's been rounded up. But we could, I mean, we can look at, I mean, I guess, what would you like to do? But I think the convention has probably been rounding up if it was a half space. So 3 units would require 4.5, which would be 5 feet.
So maybe we just ought
Make a note.
to specify that.
Well, we have two options, actually. If you want it to be 5, then you can say 1.5 for the first 2 units and which is 3, and then 2 for the 3rd unit, which makes it 5. So, or you can make it 1.5 for the first 2, 3, and 1 for the 3rd, and make it 4. That's more explicit. It's not an issue for the bigger projects because there's more movement. But when you only have 3, it's either 4 or it's 5.
Or you could say the number of spaces required for a 3-family.
You
I'm
could do
sorry.
that.
Or we could just designate the number of spaces for a 3-family.
You could. I'm just saying it's,
Right.
you're gonna put a fraction on it, it's problematic.
I think it should just be 3 spaces for a 3-family in downtown.
As a minimum.
I mean, everything else is very similar. I don't know why you would need more parking in West Gloucester.
It's gonna make it harder to achieve.
There's also design standards for 5 spaces.
Meaning people could put more in spaces if they wanted. but
Sure, it's a minimum.
Yeah, it's all you
And-
require.
Yeah,
I think
so
one per-
maybe
one
we-
per unit.
Can we add the word minimum between the and parking, the minimum parking requirements?
Oh, that's helpful.
Yes.
Nobody's gonna add parking spaces they don't need. By and large, especially on small sites. So minimum is the word here.
Remembering too, for downtown station, West Gloucester Station, you allow 1 and 2 families as well. So, again, somebody puts in a single family, they would have 1.5 spaces the way West Gloucester is currently written.
Yeah, it's awkward.
May change how you look at
So then just 1 space a unit.
it. One space unit. and
Very
one space.
But again, this is grounded in the way things are today, but that doesn't mean that it has to stay that way. Just the point.
I'm Switzerland on this one. So is 1 space per dwelling unit in the West Gloucester Station area the consensus of the board?
It is for me because you can always add more spaces.
So we're
I mean,
making,
I know the area, and if you want to encourage transit use, you make a minimum of 1. And then anybody who builds it can, instead of putting in 3, they can put in 4, 5, or 6. Right?
I think so too.
And they can see what that becomes a market-driven decision.
Yeah, and it's,
The minimum is a development standard that you either meet or you have to get a variance from, so they're different.
So on the sub-district line where it says that, and parking requirements, we're gonna add minimum parking requirements. Minimum to that or not?
Yes.
Yes,
Good. Well, there, yeah, I was thinking here, but it's the same.
Okay. Yes, true.
I did
Add it
the
right there.
chart.
We can add it right there as well. Do we need to go back to the height? Is everyone good with 35 feet for?
I think we
family?
just wanna make sure that we're not having any disagreement between the height exception of 35 and above for the 50 schoolhouse district.
You had said something to me about the model, you had modeled 35 everywhere or
So
55?
the three districts, downtown station, West Gloucester Station, and Maplewood Ave were all modeled on 35 feet. So we don't have any issue with that.
Right,
But then with the schoolhouse road, because we're allowing 55 and section 3.6 says it shall not apply for height over 35 feet, but then I think one of the questions was, can I pursue a height exception? And so if we're saying it doesn't apply, then you're also saying you're capped at 55, which I think is fine.
yes, exactly,
Yeah.
capped at 55 is fine. My
Yeah.
my concern was if you had modeled it at 55, then you were requiring a special
Right.
permit to go from 35 to 55. That would be an issue, we'd be having a
Right.
longer conversation. But I think you're fine.
can I say too, this is a question of 55 is essentially 5 stories. The maximum density is 40 per unit, 40 per acre, correct? So you're not gonna need a building of more than 4 or 5.
Yeah.
Mostly at 40 units the acre, you're gonna be looking at a 4-story building. Depending on whether you have at grade or, below grade parking could change that. But
We're so impressed that you know that.
But, you know,
Well, I'm a planner. I'm supposed to know this. Yeah, I'm supposed to know this stuff. I write code too. Emily does a nice job, but I write code too. I used to write code. I'm a retired code writer, so.
oh, what a wonderful thing to be.
Among other things, I also happen to be an expert in parking, by the way. So for 25 years, I was the planner of record for the city of Portland, Oregon's public garage system. So I know a lot about public garages. Anyway,
next subject.
So other general questions?
Didn't Sean have a
Yeah.
bunch of them? Have we addressed those?
I think,
We addressed actually everything except for, he brought up parking in the front yard setback,
Right.
which I didn't understand.
I think that's when it's at 10 feet.
yeah, so I think, that's.
Confusion of the.
I think there's a little bit of a tension which I think we've in some ways addressed some of the concerns that I think he raised at the last meeting of there's so many structures that are non-compliant and there's so many lots that are non-compliant. That's the reason for the 4,000. I think with Emily's addition to a little bit of flexibility in the setback, particularly the front yard setback for the siting of a new building or redevelopment is certainly creating more flexibility than the ordinance provides for right now. And because there's such limited area in the front yards of many of these existing homes, it does seem like it makes more sense to be locating the parking as it is required now to be either on the side or in the rear. So I think that also just from a curb cut perspective, from leaving a house to have, spaces in the front of the lot is, again, it's something that he raised. I just don't know that flexibility is necessarily needed.
Yes, you have in the parking the ability to waive the requirements as part of the site plan review for the location, so that helps somewhat. If you wanted to prohibit parking in front of the main building, you could put that into the development standard, but again, you do get odd sized lots, and so the way it's set up now, you kind of have the maximum flexibility to address the conditions on the lots.
if that's what you're looking for.
And it has to do with, if you park in the front, you're taking away street parking to a certain extent, too, right? That's kind of what would happen.
You're creating a condition between, on planner speak, right? You're creating this condition where if you're parking in the front of the lot, you've got the car, you've got the sidewalk, you've got the street. You're potentially creating an unsafe
Yeah.
condition between pedestrian and driver. So generally, you want the car to be in the side or the rear setback. The way I frequently do it when I'm doing very detailed design standards is I divide the side setback into like a front side, a rear, a side and a rear side. Parking's allowed on the side and the rear side. Parking's not allowed between building and the street. You don't have to go that far necessarily, but that is, one way of thinking about it.
Parking in the front just typically doesn't look very good.
Yeah.
So there's the
presentation-wise,
aesthetics
yeah.
as well, but it's the safety conditions too that make
Yeah,
it tricky.
yeah.
You don't always know if there's parking in the front, which is the sidewalk and which is the driveway and which is the parking area. So as soon as you get that sort of lack of communication between pedestrian and driver is when you get potential conflicts.
It'll be
So,
tight on a 4,000 square foot lot to have it on the side.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, is that, Beverly, there's a question for you.
Yeah,
Can you have,
well, it's a toughie. Yeah, okay, first of all, if you do a side by side, 3 units, the typical building is a single garage and an entry, and then 2 stories of living area above. So the issue of whether it's in the front or on the side is moot because it's incorporated into the building, okay? A 4,000 square foot lot has a 40-foot width. A typical townhouse, a side by side, and David would know this better than I, is about, the minimum is about 18 feet, 17 feet. Now, if you can get, or maybe 16 feet wide, so 3/16 is, tell me guys, 48? On a 4,000 square foot lot, if you're gonna build a triplex on a 4,000, it's gonna be one on top of the other. Then you do have to find a place to put the parking. That's not part of the building, right? Am I correct in that? I'm
So
just
then-
looking at a 40-foot frontage.
And we also can agree or disagree with the way this is all modeled, because a 4,000 square foot lot was supposed to be able to accommodate a 3-family and 6 parking spaces.
Really?
I mean, there was
Whoa, I'd like to see them.
6 spaces per unit
Right,
and a certain allowance, at least 1,000
but it's
square
assuming
feet
that
per.
it's stacking up.
Assuming it's.
Yeah, it's stacked. You can't get it long wise because you have to have a certain width of a unit. And I would say 16 feet's pretty much the maximum. I mean, the minimum, and 3/16 is more than a 4,000 square foot lot is wide. If it's a 40, if it's 40 by 100. I'm just not sure how you get it in there.
Building types. We could have a longer conversation about the model, but just not.
No,
You can get it on a 5,000 square foot lot, but not with the setback. It's these lots, these 4,000 and 5,000 square foot lots is really stacked units, not townhouses. I believe.
Yeah, I think it's I guess my only question is just to introduce her.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
No,
It's
okay.
Suzanne Even, City Council Suzanne. I just have 2 sort of after going through this, just because I like things to be really explicit, like normally I have to look at the zoning ordinance question and somebody's saying, no, it says I can do this, and we are saying, no, actually it doesn't. So I like it to be really explicit, and my thought was, and this is just really detailed, but when you have multi-building on lots, and it says that you can do more than one principal building in the Maplewood Avenue site, do we also just want to add some steps? You can't in the other districts, just to make it
really
explicit.
clear. Yeah.
right?
Yep.
And then the other thing that I was thinking is that when we had that discussion about accessory uses, there's confusion just in this room. Is to relate it to because you have a definition of accessory uses in this overlay district. So to relate it to a reference to that definition.
Yeah.
So there isn't any confusion in that.
And then the other one that I thought of was when you get to 530.9 site plan review, that section could, I think that we need something in there that makes it more explicit about how the process for site plan review, because I read this and I was a little confused of like, what does this mean? So, but you get it, but if it's up with something very explicit for 6 or more dwelling units, I think what this means is that you also have to apply for site plan review, so it's a separate application process. Is that what we're saying here?
As I understand your process, you would apply for site plan review, and I apologize, I've read 2 different sets of zoning today, so if I mess this up, it's because I'm thinking of the other community. I think you have to do the site plan review before you go for the building permit, correct? Yes,
Yes.
so you would, so this is one application for site plan review. If they receive site plan approval, then it's the application for the building permit.
Okay, so I would put that in there, okay, to make that more explicit so that people understand it. And then I had one more thought.
I guess the site plan review is only gonna apply in the Maplewood sub-district and the Schoolhouse Road
Yep.
sub-district.
You can make it that
What if
clear
we
as
just
well.
said site plan review for those and then not for the others?
Right,
Yeah.
right. And then my other,
While you're thinking of it, let me just check on this site plan review business. So you want to change 5.30.9 to say what?
Site plan review is required in the Maplewood Ave sub-district and the Schoolhouse Road sub-district.
for 6 and more dwellings.
Yeah.
So
And
just make it real explicit, that was required.
I think that's a great idea.
So if you're in the other district, the other 2 districts, and you come in and you wanna build a triple decker on your property, who's looking at the issue of the parking? And
Building inspector.
building inspector, okay.
Yep.
Okay. I think that was it. But I mean, I think that was my main, I'm just.
So let me just, before we make a motion or anything, let me review the changes that we've made. So this is a draft dated August 8th. Not August 6th. And in 5.30.4.1 dimensional tables, we want to shade the cell that says accessory uses and refer back to the definition. Under A, we want to add a phrase to the effect, you cannot do whatever this is saying you can do in the other districts.
Right.
In 5.30.6.1 off-street parking, we're adding the word minimum in both the sentence and in the table. And in the West Foster Station area, we're changing it to 1 space per dwelling unit. And 5.30.9 site plan review, we're striking that section and restating it to explain site plan review application process is required for Maplewood Ave and Schoolhouse Road districts for 6 or more units. And in additional requirements for multi-buildings on a lot, which is design standards C, we're striking the word paved in the second sentence. That's the second section. And under additional changes, we're spelling out MFOD in both cases in 5.11 and 5.8.2. Right?
Do we also want to expand, we need to make that same reference to the districts, or are we comfortable with it sending you there? So we just talked about the 6 or more in the Schoolhouse Road
Yes.
area and the Maplewood area. We could also
So
use that
add-
same language
Yeah,
in the applicability of site plan review.
at the risk of keeping everyone here
no,
longer.
let's get it right.
I think there is some power in the name and it doesn't necessarily have to just say multifamily overlay. It could speak a little bit more to the purpose, which is to encourage variety of housing options near transit. So we could go with a name that kind of promotes that a little bit more. Maybe it's more appropriate to do that in coordination with city council. So maybe at that point we would strike it up, but I just wanted to throw that out.
Do you have a suggestion?
Housing choice overlay, housing opportunity overlay, something along those lines.
I
That would
like
really,
multifamily.
that would really mess up the MFOD that goes all.
You like
here.
neophyte?
Find it
I wouldn't like that at all.
I think the city council should. be
The one good
involved.
thing about Word, right?
I just so you know, my feelings will not be hurt if you don't like multifamily overlay district, and it's an easy change, so.
It's pretty straightforward. Simpler.
Yeah.
Simpler.
Well, we can promote it to city council and say, we
You choose.
encourage you to choose a creative name. It's not on us. We're not the creative board.
It's just the average person, multifamily doesn't really mean much, so.
Now I've lost the draft. That's right. Yeah, I mean,
Thank you for your suggestion.
yes.
But we appreciate your perspective, right?
Yes.
Because you're coming from, from a state level perspective versus, a local level. And, we've got all these acronyms and backshore overlays and hooked up, And I think I don't know that the multifamily overlay district is offensive. And I don't know that there's gonna be much gained on, sprucing it up a little bit, but, yeah. Everybody, any other comments from Portland? Good,
Nope, it looks good. I have agree about multifamily because that's the rubric that everybody has been using. And
MBTA housing, anyone?
yeah, right, that would be a very, very happy.
Want to mobilize the opposition?
What's
I happen
the,
to like the housing opportunity because it's so positive, but everybody makes this distinction between single family and multifamily. So,
Just a thought.
thank you. Questions or comments?
well, next steps.
Yeah,
Yeah, yes, we said.
If you're comfortable with this draft, then I think Jane's probably
I'm
prepared to
ready
make
with
a
a
motion.
motion.
Okay,
And if she does, then it'll be forwarded to the city council to be referred out at the next meeting for public hearings.
go for it.
Okay. In accordance with section 1.11.2A of the Gloucester zoning ordinance, the planning board initiates amendments to the following sections of the zoning ordinance to permit as of right multifamily uses in compliance with MGL Chapter 40A, Section 3A by inserting a new section 5.30 multifamily overlay district, parentheses MFOD, and associated zoning map, both dated 8/8/24. Good thing we added that, as amended at this meeting. And adding multifamily overlay district after VB in section 5.113 parentheses 1. And by adding E period, projects in the multifamily overlay district of 6 or more dwelling units in the Maplewood Ave and Schoolhouse Road districts in section 5.8.2 applicability of the site plan review ordinance. I move that we forward that to city council or recommend.
Well, that's it. You
Oh,
already,
that's it?
you're already
Just
covered
did
by
that?
the, by the
Oh, I initiated
111.2A,
amendments.
because that's what
Okay.
it does.
Okay, great.
So we have a motion. I need a second.
second,
Everyone, second.
We'll give it to our senior member, Hank McCarr.
There we go.
very good.
So because Beverly is remote, we'll do a roll call vote. Member Noonan,
Yes.
member Remsen,
Yes,
member Rosen,
yes.
member McCarl,
Yes,
member Cook,
Yes,
member Bookin.
Yes,
Okay,
here's your,
that's the
it's a
document.
sacred document.
So I will share my screen with one last slide. Based on what just occurred. So, this should look familiar. It's been on the last slide of the last 5 meetings. So with agreement on the initiation to forward to the city council, it will be forwarded to the clerk's office tomorrow morning. It will be placed on the agenda for the city council on the 13th. They will refer to planning and development and the planning board for public hearing. We have discussed holding a third public forum on the proposed amendments now that as they've been just initiated on Wednesday, August 21st. And now that the PA system is working again in the auditorium, we'll be back in the auditorium. If not, alternatively, we would use Rose Baker. And we have targeted holding joint public hearings with the city council for the initial presentation, which Emily will be present at, as well as RKG on September 11th with a second hearing date of the 26th. And from that point, we'll see where we are in the process to potentially schedule additional hearing dates if needed. Again, the action plan timeline that was developed a long time ago. We have ever so slightly moved that red dot from the last meeting. We are in the legislative session process of adopting zoning. And again, we've always targeted trying to make that submission to look at that. It says DHCD, but now they're HLC in the time frame of October, November. And I think we are now on target to do that.
Excuse me, just for clarification, did you say we were gonna have a meeting on the 21st?
So the 21st will be a public forum led by the consultant team, planning staff will be
It's a
there.
Wednesday.
It's a Wednesday, it's for the public, you're welcome to attend, but we'll be promoting that for anybody that wants to learn now what the specific proposal is. Stemming from all
What
of
time
the
are you proposing?
6 o'clock start.
Okay.
So it's not a public hearing,
Correct.
it's not a meeting. It's just a forum to
Right.
present and let people have not really even have opinions, but ask questions.
Sure.
Now, I think it's good timing. I mean, very often when there's a zoning amendment going to the city council, if somebody hasn't followed the planning board process, they're learning about it at that first presentation of the public hearing. This is an opportunity for people to understand, hopefully well in advance of the public hearing, so they can formulate their questions and opinions about the proposal.
And
Great.
will we get a chance to see the presentation before then, or?
I mean, we could certainly circulate it. I think it's gonna be, again, probably taking a couple of half steps back, really kind of defining the process to get to the point that Jane asked me to summarize in 3 minutes earlier. And maybe it'll be a lot easier when you're not asked on the fly. So hopefully that, will bring people up to speed as to where and how the planning board arrived at the proposal that's been.
Great.
Can I raise an issue?
Yes.
9/11 is a Wednesday, it's 9/12 is a Thursday.
Yes, it is specifically a Wednesday.
Oh, it is a Wednesday. Okay, thank you. And this is, oh, I see. It's for the city. Okay,
We discussed that date.
It's fine, okay.
it's fine. I just want to make sure that it wasn't, that you meant Thursday, the 12th. You mean Wednesday, the 11th and Thursday, the 26th, correct?
Yes, correct.
Gotcha.
Any other things to talk about?
Not this evening.
Okay. When you're ready.
Oh, I'll move to German. Sorry about that.
Schedule. That's okay. Have a motion.
Second.
Second, a second. Need a roll call vote, Beverly?
Member Noonan,
Yes.
member Remsen,
Yes.
member Rosen,
Yes.
member Carl,
Yes.
member Cook. Yes. And member Bookin.
Yes,
Okay, have a good night.
thank you.
Thanks, Catherine.
Our next meeting is
Yes.
Next
Thursday.
next Thursday.
Yes.
I don't know where we'll,
City Hall, probably.
probably.
Thank you, Mom.
That's all.
My pleasure.